this industry does not punish people for moving around quickly like some other industries do.
I've pretty much stopped cold applying to things because it's like a waste of time.
I thought that it couldn't get any weirder than like trash dev, but now we've upgraded our guest roster and we've got trash puppy on the podcast. So I'm super excited. Interacted with you a couple times on Twitter. My understanding is that you were a nurse and now you're a software engineer. Can you tell me a little bit about why?
Yeah, well, first of all, I like that word upgraded. That was nice. Yeah, so I started as a nurse and I was a nurse for about 2 years, basically the entire pandemic from start to,
That's like the worst time to be a nurse, right?
Yeah, it really was, honestly. It was definitely fire. What do you say?
Everything was on fire?
Yeah, everything was on fire. You can say that. So I started as a nurse, and then in the spring of 22, I was working ER night shifts. And during my nights off, I had nothing to do, but I became curious about computers for some reason. So I started watching tutorials by like Network Chuck and listening to Darknet Diaries, the podcast by Jack Resider. And so on my nights off, I was like spinning up VMs, coding in Python a little bit. And I was having so much fun that I decided to try CS50. It's kind of a lengthy story, but I was still doing ER nursing, and this traumatic incident happened to me at work that kind of changed everything. It makes me a little nervous to talk about, but I was attacked by a patient and I got like a severe concussion and some PTSD. So I was struggling with that for a while, basically the next year or so. And my symptoms were so bad that I couldn't go to work. So even when my job would like have me come in on light duty, I just was like a complete idiot. I remember they put me on light duty and I went to talk to a secretary about a patient's chart. I think I wanted her to reprint it. And whatever she said to me when I went to ask her, she had to repeat it like 3 times to me because I had no idea what she was saying because I was just so dumb with this huge concussion. So anyways, I couldn't like work anymore, but I really wanted to keep learning how to code. So I kept doing CS50, and even though I could only like sit for like half an hour at a time and work on something before all my symptoms would get really bad, I just kept doing it. It was just so much fun and I loved learning everything. And then like a month later we had to move. And we ended up moving to a state where the nursing laws and the pay and everything is really bad. So I just was like, I don't want to be a nurse anymore. I think I'm just going to go into like coding and tech. And that's basically the story.
That's why. Okay, I didn't realize the full extent of the story. So you actually started coding kind of, it sounds pretty random. Like you kind of just stumbled into like Darknet Diaries and Network Chuck. Did you have like experience with computers before that? Or was that like the impetus? Wow, that's like I never meet anyone that's just like, I just like started listening to
Darknet it's kind of wild to think about because I just like, my boyfriend was a little bit into computers, so he definitely helped with that. But yeah, it really was just like I was bored on my nights off, suffering through this horrible ER job, and just kind of stumbled across Network Chuck. I already really liked cybersecurity because I was listening to Darknet Diaries when I'd go to work and stuff. So it's just like a random curiosity that sort of sparked everything.
I mean, it sounds like the accident was like sort of a forcing function of sorts to like get you like more into coding. But so were you already thinking about becoming a developer even before that? Like,
no, not at all. Yeah, I just knew that I really liked coding and tech and cybersecurity. And then this thing happened to me. It just, the more I thought about it, the more it made more sense to just make the switch, especially after we moved and the nursing laws and like rights out here where I'm at are just bad. So, it was already traumatic. That was already going to make it really hard to be a nurse again. And then it just made it even worse coming out here. So it just made sense.
I can imagine. Ugh.
Yeah.
So I know that you read up a little bit on the lore of BootDev.
Yeah.
Did you happen to read the About page at all?
No, but I did listen to your talk with Chris Sean where you mentioned that she's an X-ray technician and wanted to switch. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, well, when I saw, I can't remember which YouTube video of yours it was where you're talking about. It was actually like the reason I initially reached out, like, so let's get you on the pod. It's your story sounded very similar to my wife's story. This is now 4 years ago almost. She was working as an X-ray tech, and for her, it was more just that like she was so done with X-ray because when we moved up to northern Utah when I finished my degree, and she liked her job in the hospital as an x-ray tech, but when we moved, she got a job in a work med. And she went from like taking x-rays all day to like doing drug screens. And worse than that, she'd be like on call and have to go into the work bed like 2 a.m. in the morning. She'd bring me because she didn't feel safe going to a work bed to meet some random dude. And so like I'm getting up at 2 a.m., she's getting up at 2 a.m., and we get like $50. Like $50 to go into the work med, do a drug screen. It's like 45 minutes away. So we're spending like 3 hours in the middle of the night. We get $50 for it. So she's like so sick of it. And she was, really good at math in high school and college. So anyways, she wanted to make the transition to backend development. And that was a lot of the reason I started WebDev. And like listening to your story, it was like, oh, nursing, like it seemed like at least a similar career path at the very least.
Yeah. So did she end up transitioning in?
Yeah. So I started WebDev 4 years ago, and she took like the first 5 courses that were published on the platform. There's like 24 now. And then she got pregnant. Now she's a full-time mom. So in the future, she might actually go get a job as a programmer. But for now, it's just for fun.
Yeah, that's awesome though. Congrats that she actually managed to transition. That's cool. I love hearing stories like that, especially from healthcare.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like most of the people I talk to that are like quote unquote transitioning into tech tend to come from either education or healthcare. I don't know why those industries so often turn to programming, but it seems to be the case. So you've been learning on your own. Sounds like obviously you kind of started with podcast and YouTube and then CS50. When was this? When did you start learning?
It started that spring in 2022. I will say once I got punched and had this horrible concussion, I continued to do CS50 like I said, but I don't think I retained a lot of that, unfortunately. So when we moved, at that point it was like August. And this was when I was really considering like maybe I should switch. So I did a lot of research into what I wanted to do in tech and landed on web development. I initially actually wanted to do cybersecurity, but I was such a noob that I didn't realize that you could code and do cybersecurity. So I was like, I really love coding. I'll just go into web dev. And I actually started doing the Odin project. And that's also when I started streaming is like August 22.
Okay, very cool. And was that in like Node?
Yeah, so the Odin project is like this free platform that brings you all the way through full stack development, but it starts with like CSS and HTML. It'll move you to JavaScript, and then you can choose between learning Ruby or learning JavaScript and Node.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago they were just a Ruby on Rails thing. And then I think I remember when they started to make the switch to also teaching Node, probably due to popularity. That's really cool. So, okay, so you went through the Odin project, fast forward roughly a year. Have you stuck with those technologies? I saw recently that you're learning Go. Is that just like a complete pivot or interest? What's that about?
Yeah, so definitely one of the core things about Trash Puppy is that I pivot all the time. And it's just like tech is so huge. The more I learn, the more little rabbit holes I go down, the more I get to basically, I guess, sharpen my interest into whatever area. So I was really loving JavaScript. I still do. And then magically, I discovered that you can do cybersecurity and code. So I was branching more into like Python, and I've done some Bash. And then most recently with my project NetPuppy, I sort of made the transition into Golang. And that's why we're doing that right now.
Yes, that's so exciting. Go is, I mean, obviously, like Go is my favorite language. Surprise! Love it when people learn Go. Question I have for you: obviously, you wanted to move from nursing into software engineering, and at first glance, it definitely sounds like kind of an interest in computers is like the primary thing. Was there anything else? Like, was it benefits, remote work? Was there anything else about the industry that like really drew you to it, aside from just like a curiosity about computers?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like when I think back on it, the nursing industry and that whole situation was definitely the biggest thing that made me want to switch. But also, yeah, it's remote work a lot of the time. You get paid way more, like way better. And The fact also that it's remote work means that I can move around a lot easier. So my boyfriend's job tends to relocate a lot, and that is just better for that as well. So it just made sense because every time we'd have to relocate, I'd have to basically uproot my entire career again, and it wasn't going to help me progress in any direction to keep doing that. So yeah, there's a lot of extra benefits as well.
I mean that's how it was for my wife, right? Like she was working at a hospital down in southern Utah. We moved up here, and then like she hated the new job because it's not easy. Like if you're not remote to just move, kind of have to restart the career. So that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so you got it. You're now studying Go, and you're building a project. Is that correct? Is that NetPuppy?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yes. NetPuppies, I'm obsessed. NetPuppy is my favorite thing right now. It's a project that's basically a clone of Netcat, if you know what that is. Yeah, so I began coding it in Python because I figured, in cybersecurity, there's a lot of scripting and Python would be a good language to learn. But soon, like quickly after starting it in Python, I learned about concurrency and threading and all that. And Python was going to make it really hard for me. So that's why I switched to Go. So I've basically just been learning all the parts of Go that I've needed for NetPuppy. And I guess I haven't explained it yet, but for those who are listening that don't know what Netcat is, NetPuppy is basically a command line tool that will help you establish a TCP connection between two peers, and then they can send data back and forth. But the fun part about NetPuppy is if you want, you can start a reverse shell on one peer and basically send commands to that shell through the socket, and the bash shell will print the output back to you through the socket.
So it's kind of like an SSH.
Sort
Not
of.
quite an SSH.
Sort of. Yeah, I would compare it more to like Telnet because it's not like the
Okay.
connection's not authenticated, or sorry, that's not what I mean. It's not encrypted like SSH is. There's no sort of
Okay.
like cryptography or keys or anything.
But it's like the same idea of like a REPL. Like I'm going to send a command to the remote computer. It's going to execute it, and like I get back the output.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. That's really cool. And I get it now. Like when I first read that you were working on NetPuppy, I was like, this could be fucking anything. Like, I don't know. And I was like, oh,
Right.
it's a puppy cat. Like, I get it. I get it. It's a thing. A couple things here that are super interesting. I also started in Python, and I also learned Go due to ease of concurrency. So I was actually building a little script that would run on a Raspberry Pi and would simultaneously like read voltage data from some of the sensors. And to do it in Python, like it's certainly doable. It's not like crazy high performance computing that needs to be done in Go, but it's just like a pain in the butt to work with the threading library. And in Go, you just like go func, and then like you're in a new Go routine. So it's interesting to hear that that's also why you got into Go, because I know a lot of people are like hopping onto the Go hype train right now, and it's cool to hear that you actually like had a solid reason to get into the language. I feel like that usually goes better for the learner. You said that it was surprising to you to learn that getting into cybersecurity, coding was a valuable skill, but maybe that was non-obvious at first. Was that what you were thinking? Like, oh, I'm going to go into cybersecurity, I don't need to know how to code?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about it, I didn't know anything about computers. I didn't know anything about cybersecurity for the most part. So I didn't know that they had anything to do with one another. I thought they were on different sides of like the tech field. So I was basically just not being naive.
This is fascinating to me. I always love to hear like people who are coming into tech, what their perspectives are, because it's always different. It's like always different. Everyone like us makes different assumptions. I remember for like the first couple of years learning to code, like having no idea, like this like gnawing question in my mind. Yeah, but like how does the computer know what the programming language is? Like how does it know who told the computer how the programming language works? Like it really bothered me, this idea of like, okay, I get that I'm writing Python and the computer can execute that, but like why can the computer execute that? And like that hung me up for a long time. Doesn't hang other people up at all. The cybersecurity thing is like really interesting to me. And if you don't mind, like I want to know, like what did you imagine like a cybersecurity person does if not write code?
Oh, that's like a really hard question. It's hard to like put yourself back
Yeah.
before you knew things, you know what I mean?
Yeah, now you know. It's
Um,
hard to remember like what you assumed.
exactly. And like I did the same thing when I was becoming a nurse, like through nursing school. Even though I like worked with nurses before nursing school as a CNA, I remember a moment in nursing school where I was like, wow, I had no idea what nurses do, you know? So I'm sure my idea of cybersecurity at the time was like this romanticized sort of like, ooh, like look at this cool stuff they get to do. Cause like I said before, I was listening to Darknet Diaries basically every day going to work. The good thing about Darknet Diaries and Jack Resider is he makes those podcasts super approachable, even to people who have no idea about computers at all. So I had like a general grasp, but yeah, like it was not my grasp of cybersecurity still didn't really include coding. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like there's a lot of cybersecurity specialists out there that don't write a ton of custom code, right? They're using like command line tools, I think. Again, I'm not a cybersecurity. It's funny. I've studied a lot of cryptography just because cryptography is interesting to me. And when you study cryptography, you get a decent idea of, a lot of attack vectors and like things to be concerned about with cybersecurity. But like, I'm not a cybersecurity specialist. I haven't like had that job title. But my understanding is you spend a lot of time like using, pre-built command line tools and kind of doing a lot of manual work to like forensic your way around a system and try to control attack vectors. So like I imagine there actually is a lot of truth to it, but I can also say that I've met a breadth of cybersecurity engineers in terms of like coding skill. There's certainly some that, code a little bit, like write scripts here and there, and others that code a lot.
Yeah, and it's something that you see people talk about back and forth all the time, especially on Twitter in like the cybersecurity infosec Twitter side, whether you need to know how to code or not to be in cybersecurity. And for the most part, pretty much everyone is on the side that you don't. You can get away with being a cybersecurity professional and not knowing how to code because there is a lot of tooling that's already pre-written, but there's also a lot of roles that just don't need any coding at all. So coding, like learning how to code in cybersecurity will definitely help you. It can't hurt. And there are roles that definitely need you to be able to code or at least be able to read code, but it's definitely not required.
It's such like, again, I'm not a cybersecurity person, so I'm sure you actually know way more about the industry than I do. I kind of perceive it externally the same way I perceive, well, almost any role in tech, which is like in almost any role in tech, there's actually very few hard requirements, right? Like to be a front end engineer, what do you really need to know? And it actually like you can scope that down like really, really small because any individual role might just want React, JavaScript, Tailwind, whatever. But like in my experience, the reality is you're going to have a really hard job search if you're always trying to do the minimal amount. And so people that like just dive in and like learn a bunch of shit and, build a bunch of projects, they tend to just have a better time getting into the industry anyway, even if they did end up learning, quote unquote, more than like they really needed to for like their first role, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I see that too.
So you're like on the job search right now, right?
Yeah.
Cool. If there's anyone listening that is hiring, do you want them to reach out to you?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Definitely reach out to her. It's Trash Puppy on Twitter and on Twitch. So if you're looking for a developer, Trash Puppy is looking for a new role. But I want to ask you some questions about your job search because I haven't searched for a job now in a couple of years. And I know that the market at present is very unique. My perception is that like it's still not good, especially if you can compare it to like 2020, 2021. But it seems like the market's recovering from where it was 12 months ago, which was like, I think there were like 4 times as many layoffs in January 2023 than there have been in 2024. Are you getting some bites? Are you getting some interviews?
Yeah, I will say what I've noticed is that all of the opportunities that have come like down the pipe to me have been through Twitch and like networking in general. None of my applications have ever come back with like, yes, like most of the time I hear nothing at all. So when people come into stream and ask me about that, like what they should do to get hired, it's just all about networking right now. Like really putting yourself out there and trying to get your head like stuck up, how do I say, above everybody else's.
Yeah, like standing out from the crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
That's definitely what I've been hearing. So give me a sense for like when you say like you haven't gotten any yeses. So of all your cold applications, which I'm guessing are like LinkedIn, Indeed, that kind of stuff, have there been any even like interviews that have come from it or really just like radio silence?
Yeah, nothing from the cold applications, not at all.
That's crazy. Because like I've always known, and like I actually just released a course on this on YouTube, like collaborated with a bunch of people, put together a bunch of information about finding a job in 2023. And the big focus was on building impressive projects and networking to stand out, because that's like all I've been hearing from students is like cold applying is so hard. And it makes sense to me because, well, let me ask this question. Are you like limiting yourself to remote jobs?
So where I live right now, there's not a lot of on-site opportunities anyways. So
Hmm.
yeah, kind
Yeah,
of.
that makes sense. So like when I got my first job as a programmer, I had to move to like work there. There were not very like remote wasn't nearly as cool as it is like now when I started. And like so the majority of companies just like didn't even do remote in the first place. Now there's a lot more companies doing remote, but also there's obviously like a lot of people looking for remote positions. So like my perception of like the second order effect of that is that you have lots of job opportunities open to you as someone looking for remote work, but every single opportunity is being applied to by like 1,000 people because they're not like that application on LinkedIn or whatever, wherever you found it, 1,000 other people are finding it because it's open to the entire world. Whereas like with my first job, and even my second job, they weren't open to remote. And so like I'm competing against like 10 other applicants. So like I was getting my application answered because like it's not that hard to apply to like, or it's not that hard to respond to like 10 or 20 local people. I don't know. I mean like I definitely sympathize though with the fact that if you're limited to remote, like that's just the game right now is like how do you get noticed?
Yeah, there's that. Also around here, a lot of the jobs that are on site tend to need like security clearances and stuff like that. So I'm kind of pigeonholed into remote. I will also say my cousin told me this recently, and she's not really applying to tech jobs, but she's applying to jobs right now after getting out of college. And she's heard back like when she does the, call to see how her application is doing, that type of thing. She has heard from employers that they're getting a lot of AI generated resumes, like a ton, and they're having an issue sorting through all of those. So we're also fighting with AI generated applications and applicants that don't even have real people behind them. So yeah, I think it like for me personally, I've pretty much stopped cold applying to things because it's like a waste of time for me.
Certainly if like here's my assumption, and I could be very wrong, is that cold applying for remote positions is going to be exactly as you're describing it, like extremely hard. There's so many applications going through these application tracking systems that it's going to be really hard to get noticed. But if you aren't looking for remote jobs, if you're looking for local jobs, it might still be worth it might still be worth a shot because I imagine the volume is much, much lower.
Well, that, and then you can always show up to that place. That's sort of how I got my ER job is I had been slated for a different role in the hospital and I learned that I could have been placed in the ER. So I sort of just walked into the ER director's office and I was like, "Hey, this is why you should hire me for the ER." And just being able to do that, like even as I was sitting right in front of him, he said something like, "Yeah, well, that was ballsy. I definitely want you in the ER." Like having the face to face is just so much stronger than even cold applying or even if they're local, like just you can walk in there and that gives you a huge benefit.
I couldn't agree more. Look, like if someone is hiring in tech, they probably get zero people walking in to apply to the job, right? Like zero. I don't mean like one or two or three. I mean zero people. So like if you walk into the office and ask about the job, like I'm not saying it'll work, but it does get you noticed at the very least if getting noticed is your first problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that you're literally putting your face to a name. That's going to stick out in a hiring manager's mind way more than just an application. They're looking at you, they're thinking about you, and all what they're probably thinking is like, this person made the effort to come in, not like pretty much no one else does that. It's definitely going to give you at least a bit more attention than the next applicant.
I mean, I talk about this sometimes, but I think this is a good episode to maybe reiterate the story. Like, so I was a hiring manager before starting BootDev for several years. And one thing that was always interesting to me was I was hiring for Go developers in backend positions. And this was in 2019, 2020, a little bit into 2021 as well. And when people applied to my kind of coworkers team, he was leading like the front end team, JavaScript, React, that kind of stuff. Hundreds of applicants. And when I would open my positions, it'd be like 15 applicants. Part of just like finding a niche, like if you're doing something that not everyone else is doing, is really valuable. And of course, there's fewer Go jobs out there than there are JavaScript jobs. But my point is, like, when you do apply to a Go job, or when you do apply to, a technology or an industry or framework that's not as saturated with developers, it's another way to kind of just get noticed a little. I have a question about like where your mind's at in terms of like your career over the next 5 years. So, spoiler alert, I actually think now is a really great time to pick up coding skills. Like, surprise, I'm biased. I have a site where you can learn to code, whatever. But like, genuinely, I do think it's a really good time. But I want to know what you think. And my question is like AI concerns, not having a CS degree, lack of like tangible experience. Like, what are the things that are most concerning to you, like in your first job search?
I might have like a weird answer for this because I've had mentors ask me a similar question, like, why are you going towards cybersecurity, which is a much harder field to get into than like coding? And my best answer is that I'm not thinking about those things. Like, yeah, I'm considering them on like a very basic level, but how do I put this? I'm gonna succeed, and I'm just gonna do whatever it takes. That might sound kind of like uppity or whatever, but that's really my mindset. Like, I'm not really worried about AI. I'm not really worried that I don't have experience. I'm just going to find a way to get it done.
That's amazing. There's so many developer jobs out there realistically. And I know it's hard. I'm not trying to make it sound like, oh, it's so easy. The reality is like, if you're good and you keep trying, it is very likely that you will find a job in a reasonable time frame. Like,
Yeah.
Those two things have to be true. Like, you do have to actually be getting really good, and you do have to spend a lot of time working at it. But no, I think that's a great attitude.
Yeah, and I would add, on top of like working really hard at it and sticking to it, you can't just be like slamming your head against the wall, like trying the same thing over and over, which is why I say that I pivot all the time. The more I learn about the industry, the more that I pivot to put myself in a better position. So you have to also be thinking of ways to get in that are unique, like we were talking about earlier. If you're doing what everyone else is doing and you just keep doing that, it might eventually work, but you need to be a little smarter and try to do things in a way that's unique and it's going to make you stand out. That's how at least I've been approaching it.
No, I completely agree. Every year, if there's a one trend that I've seen for the last decade, it's that every year there's more noise online. Like, there's just more noise, like more people shouting into the void online. And what that means is like, you have to figure out a way to be the signal in the noise. You have to be figure out a way to stand out. You mentioned something though that I didn't realize. So are you only looking for like cybersecurity related jobs, or have you opened up your search to all of web development? Like, what are you focused on?
I would take pretty much anything. I would take like an IT support role right now. So no, like I definitely know that what I'm attempting to do is difficult, but as soon as like an opportunity pops up, I don't care how, like, I don't want to say below me. I don't think of it as below me, but like I would take a different role in order to move laterally if I had to. So yeah, any opportunity I'm definitely open for, just to like break through into tech.
I think that's also a fairly valuable way to look at it. So I've definitely heard a lot of people online, or even students that I've talked to, like, no, I'm looking for this very specific thing. And that's great. Like, if you can get what you're looking for, that works. But the thing is, getting a job, at least, I don't know, I live in Utah, and every job I've had, it's been like 6 months in. If there's a better opportunity, like, I have no problem putting in 2 weeks notice and moving to a better opportunity. So like, if the choice to me is between taking like an internship or an hourly job versus having no job for a year and holding out for the best one, this industry does not punish people for moving around quickly like some other industries do. I know that like in mechanical, electrical engineering, kind of like traditional engineering, it can kind of be a like red stain on your resume. I've not seen much evidence of that being the case in software engineering. It's like, if you take a job and you get 6 months of experience and you decide to move on, like, that's great. Now you have 6 months of experience on your resume.
Yeah, definitely.
AI is not worrying to you. How do you think about the idea of, like, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have a CS degree, do you?
No.
Is that at all concerning to you, or do you feel like it's just has not been a problem at all?
Yeah, no. So the other thing that I should have mentioned before is that, having been a nurse, I have this worldview that I think is a little different than a lot of people in tech. I've dealt with situations where I cannot change the outcome and the outcome sucks, right? So I've gotten pretty good at separating myself from that. So like with AI, that's a perfect example. However AI evolves and however it goes, like whatever direction it goes in, I can't possibly change that all by myself. So I don't see any reason to worry about it, if that makes sense. If you end up worrying and fretting over things that you can't control, you're just wasting energy. So that's one reason. And then you asked about, what was the other thing?
I was just asking if like you think that not having a CS degree, like how much
Oh,
of
this,
a
yeah.
problem that really is, or if it's a problem at all.
No, I will say the effect that it's had, me not having a CS degree and trying to get into tech, the only thing that I really see is that my learning is a little bit more mixed. It's not like I went from a place of like foundations to, more advanced. I'm just learning things as I need them, which can be good and bad. In fact, in my last interview for this SRE position, that was one of the pieces of feedback that I got. They said there's a couple of really advanced topics that you grasp, but you're also missing some foundational ones. And my takeaway from that was it was kind of good. At first, I didn't like the feedback because I felt bad about it. But later, after thinking about it, what it means to me is like I was able to grasp advanced topics without a good understanding of foundational ones. And it doesn't it's not like my way of learning is bad or worse or poor. Those basic topics I'll end up picking up anyways, like how I've recently been learning concurrency. So it doesn't really bother me that I don't have a CS degree. I think from the from the two bachelor's degrees that I have, I think I've got
You have
what's important
two?
about about having a degree, so I'm not too worried about it.
I'm guessing one's in nursing. What's the other one?
Yeah, so to get into nursing school, you need like a pretty good GPA, right? So instead of just doing 2 years of undergrad and then, well, nursing school is technically undergrad, but usually you would do 2 years and then your last 2 years would be the nursing school. So what I did instead to sort of help my GPA for applying to nursing school is I took an English degree. While I was doing my English degree for those 4 years, I was doing the prerequisite classes for nursing. It kind of fluffed up my GPA a little bit, so it helped me get into nursing school. So
So
that's
you
what I
had
have
like
too.
180 credits or something,
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah.
going into nursing school. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Not having a CS degree. So like, just again, to give my perspective that everyone listening to this podcast is probably sick of hearing, which is why I invite guests, is like, I don't necessarily think that a CS degree is super valuable. Like my recommendation to a lot of people is like, well, if you're 18 and like going to college isn't going to break the bank, like it can make a lot of sense to just get that CS degree. But like a lot of times it doesn't make financial sense or time sense when you're like in your late 20s or 30s or whatever. And so I think, you can definitely transition without one. But basically my philosophy is computer science is important. Computer science degrees aren't necessarily that important. I've been pretty let down by the educational system, I feel like, just in terms of like quality, but I do really value like a lot of the foundational knowledge. I just don't necessarily think you need to like learn it in the CS degree. So my question that I'm getting to is like, do you spend more time building like practical projects or trying to brush up on like foundational, almost like computer science stuff?
Definitely the projects, for sure. Literally just did a post about this. So NetPuppy is a super good example because the goal is NetPuppy. The goal is my project. That's why I switched from Python to Golang because I wasn't trying I wanted to learn Python, but that wasn't the point. And I like learning Go, but it's not the point. The point of NetPuppy is to get NetPuppy. So through coding NetPuppy in that way, I've learned so much already. I've already learned how to do unit testing, how to do concurrency and threading, which I keep harping on. All those parts of Go that I had no idea existed. I really think that when you learn through making projects, you're going to learn a lot better. And yeah, your education's going to be a little bit mixed, but like I said before, you'll end up learning the basics along the way because they're basic, right? They're going to be foundational to pretty much everything that you're doing. So yeah, I almost never sit down and just learn foundational subjects unless I need them. Like I'm about to release my second devlog video on NetPuppy, but I talk about it in the video. I spent like an entire day, probably 8 to 10 hours just learning asyncio and concurrency and threading. because I really wanted to for NetPuppy. If you had told me, hey, you got to go sit down and learn threading, I'd be like, I'd probably try it and be like, I'm not retaining any of this. I don't care. Like, it's just not as effective for me, maybe for other people, but yeah.
That's awesome. I do think there's like a bit of variability from person to person about what's effective, but I think there's less variability than we sometimes say online. Like it's nice to believe that we're all like very unique snowflakes, but I actually do think that like there are some just generally good ideas. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of project-based learning. I think every foundational concept you learn should be in the context of a larger project. I do think that getting the foundational knowledge can save you a lot of time, because like going from project to project, it can be spotty. That doesn't mean it can't work. I guess my philosophy is like somewhere in the middle, but with a big emphasis on projects. The way I put it is, in my CS degree, there was a huge lack of projects. It felt like almost everything I learned was in a vacuum. And then occasionally there would be a project, and like sometimes the project wouldn't even apply, like the foundational stuff that I just learned. And on the flip side, that I would sometimes see are like the JavaScript boot camps of like 2020 that like really were churning out students in 12 weeks. They would just be like 4 React projects. And like I also see a problem with that, because there was very little understanding of what was going on under the hood. And I think that kind of worked in 2020 for some people, but like has really bitten a lot of people in the ass in the last couple of years, where the job, like the bar for getting into the industry has been a little bit higher.
Definitely. And it can be hard when you're doing projects, like you said. If you don't know the foundations, you're going to end up, fucking something up and wasting a little bit of time with, I keep talking about NetPuppy because I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, it's the best. Do it.
Yeah. The time that it took me to realize that Python wasn't going to do the job technically was time wasted. But I don't really consider it that, because
it so wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, if I had tried to sit down and learn those things without any sort of reason, I would have sort of just learned it for half a second and lost it. Whereas if you're like fighting with your program to do this thing and it's just not doing it, so you have to go learn a subject in order to make it, it's so much closer to you that I feel like you're just going to retain it way better.
This is why I hate tutorials, and like everything I do is so anti like tutorial hell. Is usually when you're following a tutorial, especially like the more guided the tutorial, the worse it is. But when you're following a tutorial, like all of the learning has been abstracted away for the most part. Like it's trying to show you the happy path. And to me, the learning happens in the sad path. Like all of the different sad paths you go down, and then you finally get to the happy path. Like that's where the real learning is. And so people like hop into our Discord and it'll be like, oh, I wasted 2 hours because I couldn't get the right version of Python installed. It's like, no, like now you get that it's not a trivial task. And I guarantee over the course of your career, if you work in Python, like you will spend a non-trivial amount of time getting Python working on many different systems. And all those struggles, like learning that there is a system Python, God forbid, I don't even know why that exists, but like there's a system Python. There's like this thing called Anaconda that you probably shouldn't use. There's like virtual, like all that stuff is extremely valuable, even if like you didn't need it for the project.
Yeah. The happy path versus the sad path definitely is a thing. Like when I learned that Python couldn't do the threading that I had just learned how to do and was so excited to implement, that was like soul crushing, like I was really upset, and I had like a whole little freak out on Twitter about it or whatever. But that just made it like hit so much harder, and I guess sink in so much better, because it was such a struggle and such a letdown to learn that.
I had a similar experience. This is about a decade ago. I was using Django to build so Python Django for like some web stuff. And the app like worked locally, and it was cool. It's like, okay, now I want to deploy it. And I'm looking into how to deploy it. And it's like, wait, I can't just like pip install Django on the server and like run it and like bind to a port. Like, why not? And it turns out the recommended way at the time was to use this thing called WSGI, Web Server Gateway Interface, and to set up Nginx in front of it, all on one goddamn server. I don't know why I need a load balancer, like for one box. And the reason it turns out is because like the whole Django application is like single threaded. So it's spinning up like multiple processes of the entire application. I'm like, this was so confusing to me. And the crazy thing is I was doing it and I didn't understand why. And I just assumed that this is always how it was. And then later I learned Go and I was like, wait, I can just bind to a port and deploy the thing, or like Node works the same way. I can just bind to a port. So anyways, all this to say, like sometimes like that pain of like seeing that that's how Python did it, like just gave me a little bit more perspective on how the whole thing works.
I know, exactly. So did the way that what you just described, was that all because of the GIL, to satisfy the GIL?
Oh, the global interpreter lock.
Yeah, yeah.
I assume so. When you write an app in Django, all of that's essentially abstracted away from you. But my assumption is that the reason the recommended way to deploy it is because of the global interpreter lock and because of the inefficiency of threading within one single process. And also,
Yeah.
I think I could be wrong, but I think Django like just makes use of global variables like all over the place.
Oh, I'm
And-
sure. Because with the
Yeah.
GIL, the reason I asked that is because you said single threaded and then you're talking about the multi-processing. And that's how Python works. They take all your threads, your beautiful threads that you made, and it forces them into a single thread because the GIL is like protecting you from thread safety, you know?
Yeah.
It's very upsetting once you
Yeah.
learn, once you know what's actually happening.
And you have to like dig into the Python internals like to figure out what's going on, because it's not like obvious based on the code you're writing necessarily that that's what's happening behind the scenes. And like that's frustrating from like a learning perspective. This is all ironic because on BootDev we teach you Python and then we teach you Go. And part of the reason I do that is because I think Python's like a really great introduction to programming, but then it's to be like, actually Python's really slow and hard to use in production, so like we're going to use this other language for deploying
Yeah.
backend applications.
I love that. I love that.
So what has been the hardest thing about learning Go so far?
The post that I recently made is all about how a lot of people, since I've been coding this, I do it live on stream, so a lot of people watch. A lot of people have come up and been like, wow, you're learning Go so fast. And they're like shocked about it, right? And apparently that's because the parts that I'm learning are kind of difficult. So like I needed channels and Go routines for the concurrency. And then I decided I should do unit testing. So I needed interfaces and structs. And like, if you were to go back and watch any of those VODs, you can see that I'm struggling really hard to understand what the heck is happening. And I'm getting a lot of help from chat because it's just, I think the hardest thing about Golang so far has been just trying to shift the way that I think about coding. And a good example of that is like with JavaScript, when you make an object, the methods and the properties are all right there, right? In Golang, they're all separated into their own little code blocks. And that is super hard for me. Like, I don't know if it's because I'm a visual learner, but it just took me a long time to be like, oh, this is a method. It's not just a regular function. Like, not being able to physically see them all grouped up has been hard. So yeah, just like shifting how I think about the code and visualize it, I think is probably the hardest part so far.
Yeah, for people coming from JavaScript and Python, and I'll just explain a little bit for our listeners, like, yeah, when you define a class in Python, for example, you put like the data members, so like the variables that are associated with the class, like right there in the class definition. You do the same thing with the methods. And in JavaScript, you can do it that way very similarly. Yeah, in Go, there's this idea, well, first of all, there's not classes, but like you've got this struct and it's just data. Like structs are just fucking data. Like just put some fields in there, they're just data. And then if you want to attach methods to your structs, you could like define that anywhere else in the package. It could be in a completely different file if you wanted to. And I haven't actually thought about that, but that's interesting that was like a hang up.
It makes a lot of sense that I started with JavaScript and like front end because I can see what's happening, right? Learning how to code has definitely taught me or reinforced that I'm super visual. It's hard for me to picture these things. So that was a huge trip up for me. It might not be for other people, but yeah, like conceptually, when I think about code, it just makes it way easier to see those things grouped up when they're grouped up, you know? Like a class to me is a bunch of methods and properties that are grouped up together. So seeing them like that on the page is much easier than seeing them all like disjointed in different places.
I definitely get that. I think in the context of classes, I completely agree. Like, I want the methods right there associated with the class explicitly. Structs in Go are interesting because, like, the methods, like, yeah, they're attached. The coupling doesn't feel as strong with methods in Go. And maybe it's just because you don't use them quite to the extent that you do in Python, but maybe that's a distinction without a difference. Now that I think about it, I don't know. I mean, the reality is, for me at least, when I'm writing Go code, I will pretty much always like put the struct at the top of the file and then all of its methods right below it. So it's like not indented at the same level, but like they're right there. But you could move them if you're a crazy person, I guess. So what do you like about Go the most? Like, what's your favorite thing about the language so far?
It's kind of weird. I love Go, and really the thing that I like about it most is that it's not lying to me. And maybe that's just like, maybe I'm still a little salty about Python telling me that we were threading and we weren't. But I like that it gives you so much more control over what you're doing. And the more that I learn about coding in general and Python and JavaScript and the difference between all these languages, is it seems like some languages choose to abstract things away from the user or the programmer to make it a little easier and faster. But whenever they abstract these things away, it makes it a lot harder to understand what you're doing. So same thing, like if I can picture it or like literally do it, I'm going to understand way better than when I'm just like trusting Python to give me threads. So I really like that you have a lot of fine-grained control over your code and it's not doing things that you didn't expect it to do. It errors appropriately. Like even just having types has been super nice. You know, you get a weird error and you're like, oh, that's a type thing. I can find that right here. Like, so really that's what it is. The fact that it's grittier, and I know it's not like the grittiest language, right? We could go all the way down to C or whatever, but it's grittier than I'm used to, and I like that. I like being able to just like touch and hold my own code, I guess.
What's your least favorite part about Go?
I would say setting up the environment is a little annoying, but I think that's something you ultimately just get super used to and you become fast at. So
That's
I don't think it.
interesting coming from Python. I usually
Yeah.
hear that coming from other ecosystems, but like in my opinion, like Go's not the easiest thing to set up, but like Python's just about as bad as it gets.
And to be fair, I didn't code a lot in Python. I did like one TwitchBot project, a couple of like Code Wars, and the NetPuppy. So, and with NetPuppy, I had contributors that were helping a lot, especially with the environmental stuff. But yeah, I think other than that, I just love Go. There's not a lot I don't like about it so far. It'll probably change, but
No, it won't. It won't.
all
And if it does, I won't invite you back.
right,
So
no,
we'll
yeah,
never
I
find
love
out.
it forever.
Just kidding. That's yeah. Okay, coming from Node, that does make sense because like it's like with Node, you install Node and then you're kind of done. Um, with Go, it's like you install Go and then you have to figure out how modules work in order to compile anything useful, and that's not so bad. Part of the problem though is that, well, actually, I'm going to ask, like, did you have any confusion around setting up Go modules versus like the old GOPATH stuff?
A little bit. Like, I sort of am starting to get a good concept of how that works. I will say that I've been flirting with Go for a long time. And the first time that I really was trying to use it, I definitely deviated from how you're supposed to set them up. And I still kind of do that. Like, I don't keep it at the Go path or whatever, where Go's installed. I definitely deviate from that a lot.
What do you mean? How does that work?
So, like right now, NetPuppy on my VM that I code out of, I have a repos directory that's like in the home directory. And then I'll have all my repos. And because you have to have like the package source and bin files right there, I kind of have to make like a little shell repo for NetPuppy. And then in there, I've got NetPuppy, the actual repo, and all the little like source bin package directories too. Does that
Huh.
make sense?
Yes, kind of. To give a little background, also this will be useful to listeners. Like rewind 6 years or 7 years, you were forced when you were a Go developer to like do this weird thing where you like set up a Go path on your system, and then you had to like put all of your Go code in there. And like if you didn't do that, like everything broke. That changed a couple of years ago with Go modules, and now you can like put your code wherever you want. The problem is like a lot of tutorials still reference the old Go path, and so people get confused. So I actually don't know. Like I wonder if maybe there's some Go path stuff in your setup that's maybe just like confusing the whole experience. I'd always be happy to help if you ever want me to look at something, because it should be good. It should be a good experience, and I want you to have a good experience.
Yeah, I will say for now, as long as I don't touch it, we're fine. The next
I can
time
compile, like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, the next time I have to set up a Go project, yeah, maybe I'll hit you up, but we're good for now.
I mean, that's a good attitude. If it compiles, if you can run the tests, like, good enough. Thank you so much for coming on. This is a lot of fun. Where can people find you online, find what you're doing? Again, reach out to you with job opportunities if they're looking for a developer.
Yeah, so it's Trash Puppy, usually without the A, unfortunately. I wasn't, early enough on scene.
Church
So,
Puppy?
yeah. So I'm on Twitter, Twitch, GitHub, LinkedIn, YouTube. I'm on YouTube. Yeah.
All the places,
Any of
same
those
handle?
places. Yeah, pretty much.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, I really wish I had the A, but what can you do?
Yeah, well, it's actually fun. There's something about Trash. Like when I had Trash Dev on, same story, except with him, it's 2 H's. He's like trash. Right. I think we've now completed the arc of like garbage vocabulary developers. I don't think there's anyone else. I think we've hit them all.
Yeah, not that I know of. If you find one, let me know though, so I can take care of that.
Yeah, I can't have anyone infringing on your brand. Cool. Talk to you later. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is fun.